So in the human being, the thinking part is called mano, whereas the emotional part is called chitta. But the Buddha pointed out was, what has to be done is not to obey the chitta. What is happening today is that the mano part, the thinking part, is doing what the chitta wants. You see, chitta is dominating the mind. And the mano is just catering to the chitta. There is a verse where the Buddha says, Chittena niyati loko, chittena parikassati, chittassa eka dhammassa, sabbeva vasamang bagu. What that means is, chitta is dominating the world. Chittena niyati loko. Loka is the world. Chittena niyati loko. Chittena parikassati. Chitta is disturbing everything. Chittassa eka dhammassa. Chitta is that one thing. Sabbeva vasabang vagu. That everyone is spellbound by chitta. Everyone is dominated by chitta. Like being spellbound. So therefore, the only thing is to learn how to gain control over the chitta, the emotional part. It is very important to understand that modern psychologists have become aware of this. It was Sigmund Freud. He didn't use words like chitta and mano, but he used words to refer to the emotional part and the thinking part. He began to understand these two things, chitta and mano. The emotional part he called the id, I-D, id. The thinking part he called the ego. Why did he call the emotional part the id and the thinking part the ego? Because he discovered that these emotions are acting unconsciously. You see, now these machines like the clock or even the air conditioning or any other machine, they are inanimate. We have the word called inanimate. That means there is no real consciousness doing anything. It happens automatically based on the conditions. When the necessary conditions are present, it happens. How the clock moves is based on certain conditions. One condition creates another thing, and that creates another thing. That creates another thing. That is how it goes. They are mechanical. We call it mechanical. Now, mechanical means there is no thinking going on there. So, therefore, that is called inanimate. They are inanimate. So, when we refer to an inanimate thing, we use the word it, it, it. Now, when we say he or she, we are referring to people who are supposed to be animate, thinking, reasoning, he and she. So he saw the emotional part as something inanimate. So he used the word it, but he used the Latin word id, id. Id, id is it in English. So he used the word id. But when he spoke of the mano part, which is the thinking part, which is done by the cerebral cortex, the thinking part, he called the ego. Ego means the self. That means it is like he and she. So he thought that is the animate part, the thinking part. He thought of as something that is conscious and doing thinking, whereas the emotional part is unconscious. But he also saw that even the thinking part is mostly unconsciously done. That even our thinking is to a great extent unconscious. That is why he spoke of this unconscious. And to explain the unconscious, he used the analogy of piece of ice, what's that? Iceberg. Yeah. He used the iceberg. It's like we put a block of ice on the water or something. It floats. So the iceberg is a huge block of ice floating in the ocean. So what he pointed out was that when that block of ice is floating in the water, a greater part of the block of ice is under the water. and only a small part is seen at the top. So in the same way, our mind, the greater part of the mind is unconscious, and only a small part is conscious. Now his problem was how to gain control over these emotions. He saw that it is very important to gain control over the emotions, that we must somehow control the emotions. Because normally people are being dominated by the emotions. He was aware of this. But he thought we can never get rid of emotions. Because emotions are things that come from the body itself. It is the body that contains all the organs necessary for the emotion to arise. And therefore, we cannot get rid of the emotions. That is what he saw. So he thought the only thing that we can do is what he called sublimation. Sublimation means to direct the emotional impulse in a socially acceptable channel. Sublimation. So that was all that he could do. And only when we have been able to sublimate the emotions, that we become what are called civilized people. Huh? A civilized person is a person who has sublimated the emotions. So he had to write a book where he called it Civilization and its Discontent. That means a civilized person is an unhappy person. Why? Because that person cannot satisfy his desires. You see, these human beings, like other animals, they are not only getting angry and things like that, but they have also desires. A man will want not just one woman, they might want several women. And women also may be wanting the same way. But the problem is, if you are civilized, you are supposed to marry only one woman. But this is why the Muslims are supposed to have several women. But whatever that is, The problem is, to be civilized is to gain control over the emotions. You see, that is the problem. So the civilized person is not really happy because he has to gain control over the emotions. And even if you are angry with someone, you can't kill. Now, if you go and do a job and the boss says something to you which you don't like, you can't fight with the boss. If you fight with the boss, you'll be thrown out of the job. So it's very important to gain control over your emotions. And the people who gain control over the emotions become unhappy people. This is the problem. Not only that, even if you get married, at the beginning, you like your wife or husband at the beginning, but after some time, you begin to see that the husband or wife is doing something else that you don't like. Then you begin to fight and quarrel. And sometimes people divorce. You see, all this is because you're not always satisfied and you become unhappy. You see, the important thing is that Freud could not ultimately get rid of the emotions. You know, an interesting thing happened when I went to United States in 1970. I was asked to talk to the American peoples, and I had to talk to some American people who were listening. I told them that the Buddha is a person who has given up, completely eliminated lust, hate and delusion. Lobha, dosa and moha. A man who was listening to me laughed. I asked, why are you laughing? You are talking about something that is impossible. Because according to Freud, you cannot get rid of emotions. You see, unfortunately, at that time I didn't know enough psychology to answer that question. But then, later, I studied psychology and began to realize Freud was talking about this at the beginning of the 19th century. Now, I became a monk during 1960s. And during the 1960s, a new kind of psychology came into being. And that is what is called cognitive psychology. And these cognitive psychologists, they began to realize that there was a method of gaining control over emotions. That is the important thing. And what was that method? They pointed out that they also saw this same problem. What is that? The mano and the chitta, Now what Sigmund Freud called the id and the ego, these people call the ego the cognitive part, and the emotional part they called the affective. The cognitive and the affective. And they pointed out that the emotions are excited only according to the way the cognitive part or the mano interprets circumstances. You see, I told you some time back, a few days ago, that we are born with 5 senses, and the 5 senses are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. But all that goes to the brain, and it is the brain that begins to think, and that is the mano part. And according to the way you think and interpret what is going on there, the emotion is aroused. So the emotion is based on the way you interpret your circumstances. And therefore, if you change the way you interpret your circumstance, the emotion is not aroused. Although the body has all the organs necessary for the emotion to arise. Now today the psychologists are talking about this, the scientists are talking about this. Now we spoke of this thing called the amygdala, which is obtaining information from the senses and then sending messages to the glands to produce hormones, and then that leads to the emotional excitement. But they have also discovered that from the senses, when the message goes to the amygdala, another message goes to the brain from the senses. And the brain begins to think. But the only problem is the message going to the amygdala is quicker than the message going to the brain. And the brain, before the brain is able to act, the amygdala has aroused the emotion. But still, when the brain begins to think and understand, there is nothing to worry. It's like, say, supposing some big sound we hear outside and we get excited. Oh, what happened? But then, when you begin to think, oh, it is only thunder, it's going to rain and it was thunder, there's nothing to worry about. So it's like that. You see, today, something like that happened to me. You see, I was, after we had lunch, or before lunch, I think, somehow I was in my room there, and big noise coming up, as if something is breaking down in the house. So I got up and looked at out of the window, what is going on. They are breaking that roof there. So I thought, something is happening here. So, but then later I began to realize that they are doing some repairs here. There is nothing to worry about. But still, because that message goes from the outside, because I heard the noise and I got excited about this. But then, later when I started thinking about it, then I began to realize there's nothing to worry about. So it's something similar happens, and so this is why today the scientists are becoming aware of these things, and there is a story in the sutras where, Sariputta and Moggallana were the chief disciples of the Buddha. And Sariputta, he was the chief disciple. And he had a brother. And the brother was now meditating. And the Sariputta was also there near him. And they were in some kind of cave, rock cave. And some animal like a spider fell onto this brother. He was meditating and bit the brother. So when that happened, the brother knew that he was beaten, and not only that he is going to die. So he said, well, now an animal fell into my body, and now I am going to die. So please do whatever is necessary, and I am ready to die. And then Sariputta saw him and said, oh, I am very happy. You have become an arahant. Because he is not emotionally excited about this. So before he died, he became an arahant. So he was happy, and so he died. So this is a very similar thing that we hear of. And there was another instance where there was a teacher who was, they were teacher and the student, both were meditating. And although the teacher was meditating, the student became an arahant before the teacher. Student became an arahant before the teacher. And now the student saw that the teacher has not become an arahant. So now the student wanted to help the teacher. So he can't go and say, oh, you're not an arahant and I can teach you, and the student can't do it. So what he did was, he went to the teacher and said, you have progressed in your meditation and you have certain psychic powers. And can you create an elephant? So he said, okay, I can create an elephant. And he created an elephant. So then he said, okay, now make the elephant rush towards you. So he made the elephant to rush towards, and then he got frightened. Then he said, you're frightened. Yeah, because then he realized that he was not an arahant. Because the arahant don't become frightened like that. So then he said, okay, I told you this to make you realize, and so this is what you should do. And then he told him how to meditate and become an arahant. That's the main thing. So these are also instances where we get this idea of the message going in two directions. You see, one message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this, and if we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, mano means the thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called chitta. Mano pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method, and that is what we are using in this book. If you read this book, here the Buddha is, I am talking about this, that what is called the 7 steps to awakening, Sapta Bojjhanga. The Sapta Bojjhanga is really using that same principle, and that is how the emotions are completely eliminated. And that elimination of the emotion, this is not understood by all the modern meditators who talk about vipassana, bhavana and all that. They are unaware of this. This is why this message that I am talking about is a very important message. That this has to be conveyed to the world. And that is how our friend is now prepared to do these things, that we will be able to somehow convey this message to the world. That the Buddha, how he eliminated all emotions, lobha, dosa and moha, lust, hate and delusion, completely eradicated. He was able to do this because of this sapta bojjhanga, based on the principle that you get in the first verse in the Dhammapada. And that is very important to understand this, and that is how we are able to get rid of these emotions completely. And so, you can learn this meditation and begin to ultimately somehow reach some stage, even if you can't reach that stage in this life, even in a future life you might be able to. The important thing is to learn this properly and practice it, and also speak about it to the others in the world. So the modern Sangha or the monks who are even going to other countries and trying to talk about Buddhism, they have to learn this. Today most people who talk about Buddhism don't know about this. This is the problem. So it is very important to spread this message to the world. And today a lot of people in the West are getting interested in Buddhism. And they are also doing research and they are practicing this meditation. And it is very important for all these people who are interested, they should learn this. And we have to spread this message. So I hope you understood, and we have come almost to close to 4 o'clock. So continue the meditation in this way. Now the time has come, what is called the tea time. So